All right, and we're connected. So that's the thing.
Nice.
All right, fantastic. Well, this is gonna be fun. So, since this is gonna end up on YouTube at some point, I guess I'll start with a brief introduction for the 0 people that are watching right now. Um, but hopefully more as they begin to file in. That's the hope, anyways. Um, so, welcome to the encounter table. I am one of your hosts, Vladdviever, but I'm just gonna go by Owen on the internet because that's what everyone calls me. I'm joined by my co-host, Tayugetsu,
You can call me Marvin.
because most people do. Um, and we're going to talk about D&D, specifically probably dungeon mastering, but other stuff too, since we do all of that. And the show, while largely about Dungeons and Dragons, since that's the system we've played the most of, we'll likely be talking about other tabletops as well, since we've also played some of that stuff too. So, um, yeah, do you want to just kind of say a little bit about ourselves first, I guess?
Sure.
All right. You can go ahead and lead.
Cool. Uh, like I said, I'm Marvin. Uh, I've been playing D&D for about 15 years. Uh, I've been DMing for 12 to 13 of those years, so, you know, I've been at this a long time. Not as long as some, but longer than most. Uh, and I live in sunny Florida.
All right. And one of those things is a lie. Um,
Which one?
Florida's not sunny. Um,
That's not what the motto for the state says.
it's the carry an umbrella state. For like half the year anyway. Um, so I'm Owen, of course. Similarly, I've been playing D&D for I think 17 years now. Just about 16 or 17 years. I started maybe a year or two before you did, Marvin. I've been DMing the entire time, basically, since the first D&D game I first home game I ran. I ran it for my friends, so I've been DMing just as long as I've been playing, and that's been an experience for sure. Um, I am also located in Florida, although I'm not going to describe it as sunny, but we're there.
Oh, rude.
I mean, look, if the state wanted to be known as sunny, then it would be sunny, but it's not.
That's not the point here.
All right. Well, the point is that we have about 30 years of D&D experience between the two of us, a bit more than, and that means that we are pseudo qualified to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and dungeon mastering and such. So we are here to do that, but also, talk to, you know, chat as well. So, that being said, if you are interested in saying hi, chat, uh, chat is on the screen just to make our lives a little bit easier. Although I am going to move it just to make my life a little bit easier, so it can actually be seen. There's probably a way to make. I know what I can do. Sorry, I'm working through this as we talk. So
You should be sorry.
yeah, professional streaming and all that. All right, we're gonna do this for now, and we're gonna have chat be in the corner here. So, all right, so the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about, because it's something that don't break the fourth wall. Look, I can break as many walls as I want to. Um, Crashing through them. That was King Flank. Welcome in.
I don't
Um,
think that's how that works.
can there be a fourth wall if there isn't any wall in the first place? Um, it's a talk show. I can talk to whoever I want.
True.
Um, so the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about, I guess, is starting up for the first time. Do you remember your first, how you kind of got your first group together?
Um, yes, kind of.
Long time ago. Um, was it just like friends or?
Um, so it was actually cheese.
Okay.
um, it was like freshman year of high school for me, and it was like right after his first session. He was like, "Hey, you want to play D&D?"
I can
And I
appreciate
was
that.
like, "Yeah, I guess. Let's. What do I do?" He was like, "First, we got to find people." And I was like, "Well, we're in the anime club. We only know nerds."
Okay, so this must have been right around the time that I started then, because he was in my first session that I ran.
Yeah, probably about the same time then.
So yeah, I take it back. We've been playing for almost exactly the same amount of time then. Maybe give or take a few weeks. Um,
Yeah.
so, which makes the math a lot easier. Um, right on. Before he had asked you, had you like played D&D like had you heard of it before? Like was it something that you were already kind of interested in doing?
I had heard of it, and I think I actually sat in on one of the games that you were playing in before I actually played.
There's a not zero chance that happened. Honestly, my memory's super fuzzy from then.
Because I remember the first time that I was actually in the room of a D&D game. It was at your house.
Yeah,
And
there was a lot of people in that room, to be fair.
I think Bobby was the DM, if I remember right.
Ooh, that's a strong possibility. So that wouldn't have been exactly our first campaign, because the first campaign that I ran, Bob was definitely one of the players. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty sure that Cheese was as well. Yes, I'm very certain that he was as well. And I believe Bob ran our second campaign of that like group setting,
Mm-hmm.
which was a wild campaign for sure. Had probably my most memorable dice roll that I've ever had in my life. Um, don't think it's going to get topped unless someone puts a gun to my head. Um, so, which is a story I'll share later, I guess. Um, yeah, so, okay. And it was, I guess, 3.5 then was probably the edition that you started with.
Yep, yep. I played a half elf sorcerer. Uh, if I remember right, it was some super edgy, super weeby name
Oh, of
that
course.
translated to like dark dragon or some shit.
Well, really glad to see you've grown out of that phase. Um,
Oh yeah, look! I'm Taio Getsu,
well,
not edgy or weeby at all.
I mean, in your defense, you picked that screen name a long time ago.
Roughly around the same time, actually.
Yeah, so it fits. Um, so my first character I played. So I guess my first introduction to D&D was through like just like counter monkeying around with some of the folks at the comic book shop. But
Mm-hmm.
my first time actually playing was at a convention at just like one of those like one shots that they run at convention halls or whatever. I had sat in and played as a monk,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a blast. I got into an argument with the paladin of the group, and it was a ton of fun, honestly.
Nice.
Um, and then from there, I picked up the books because as a young teenager with a job and nothing else to spend money on, what else are you gonna do? Um,
Consistent.
I mean, let's be honest, right? Um, I was fortunate in that I was still living with my parents, so
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, I picked up the books, read through them, and I started asking people around. And eventually, I was able to get quite a lot of people actually. I think my first D&D game that I ran had 7 players, maybe 8. Actually, hold on, I can
Nice.
list them off. Bob, Ron, Tasha, Kevin Tulan, John, Cheese. It was like 6 or 7 then. I'm sure I'm forgetting some people. Oh, Will. Will was there too.
Huh. I know like all of these people.
Yeah, I mean you would. We ran in the same circles. Um,
You're
because we were.
breaking up on my end here.
Can you hear me now?
Slightly better.
Okay. Well,
Oh, there you go.
hopefully that gets fixed. Um, yeah, I mean we ran in the same crowd, I guess. So or similar circles. So I guess it would make sense that you would know most of those people, if not all.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so I ran my first D&D campaign in there, did a homebrew world, and it was poorly done, if I'm being honest. But the plot itself was kind of fun. Um, but I actually got pretty burned out towards the middle, due in no small part because I had a really toxic player in my game. Um, I would say, and so
Consistent.
I eventually ended up swapping DM places with that person, to take a break, and I ended up playing a Scion as my first character, like in a proper D&D setting, who had a similarly like weeby kind of thing going on. So, but I mean, it wasn't like like Ryu Sensei or something, but some like Japanese whatever. Um, it wasn't quite that bad, but I mean, it wasn't like a very it wasn't a very interesting character. I'll just leave it at that. Um,
I mean, how many people have interesting first characters? Not a whole lot.
yeah, virtually zero, right? Um, I would say like I mean, sure, some, but probably not many.
It's rare.
Yeah, incidentally, one of my players, like right now. Um,
Oh yeah, he's great.
so so yeah, so obviously that group eventually came to an end. Those campaigns come to an end. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to like get a new group together?
um, yes, but it was always at a time where somebody said, "Hey, we're looking for a group."
Hey, welcome in, Muse Rage. So, yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that happen. I find that I end up being the forever DM pretty frequently. So, so for me, I would say my biggest, like, I mean, I've been invited to some groups before. Obviously, the Sagas game that we both played, I was invited to.
Hmm.
Just move the mic a little bit further away from my mouth. So I was invited to the Sagas game, of course, and had a blast playing that. And then, of course, VC, Pokemon Adventures. But I think kind of once I was invited to the Sagas game, that kind of put me in the circle with a lot of people who were into playing role play games again.
Hmm.
Prior to that game, I probably hadn't played for, I would say, maybe a couple of years, to be honest. Just because it had been a while. Like the initial group that I played in, that kind of fell apart due to some kind of interplayer conflict and people's schedules kind of growing
Hmm.
apart. And I find that happens with a lot of people, where like the schedule just kind of falls apart.
And
And
you
I
had also moved away for a while, so like,
yeah, I mean, I did also move to Vegas for over a year
because
or
you
almost a
joined
year.
Sagas not long after you moved back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, within a couple of months, actually. No, it would have been almost the same month, I think, that I moved back. Because at the time I was crashing at a friend's house.
Hmm.
We didn't even have a place to stay yet, and we were only there for maybe like a couple of months. Like I think it was through like November through December or something. Or I think by December we had gotten our own place, but it was through like Thanksgiving. So so yeah, but prior to that, I mean the campaign kind of fell apart. Um, and then of course, we were running games through basically until I moved to Vegas again,
Hmm.
like 5 years ago or whatever. And I had to, hey bunny, I had
What
to
up, bro?
to get a new game together from that. So that was really difficult actually, where it's like I have all the DMing experience now, and I have I want to do this, but I literally know nobody in the town. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so that was kind of rough. Um, but I think
um,
yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say I mean for me I just ask people that like I mean like it sounds really dumb when you say it out loud, but I just asked people that I worked with if they were interested. Like I know not everybody has the like I don't know if you want to call it personal charisma or whatever, or the just like who's okay like putting that kind of thing out there. But I think that nowadays like D&D is much less stigmatized than it used to be.
Oh, absolutely. Like, there's virtually no stigma to D&D these days, unlike when we were just starting and before.
Yeah, definitely pretty different times. It's been really weird watching like D&D just become like this very like I won't say well known because it's already always kind of been a well known thing, but it just like seeing it become much more mainstream than it used to be.
More socially acceptable.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a better way to put it. Like I can tell people I play D&D, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's cool." And invariably,
Hmm.
if you say that you play D&D and they are even remotely interested, like a lot of times people end up asking you to play.
Yeah, that is actually my biggest problem with D&D.
Mm.
I always have too many players who want to play and not enough time to run that many games.
Yeah, because there really is like an upper limit to the number of people you can have in a session, anyways. Like before it starts to just
Hmm.
break down.
Yeah,
Because what? I mean, what's the
yeah.
biggest group that you've run?
The biggest group I've run in person is like 8 people,
Yeah,
and
that
like
just sounds miserable.
combat was a slog. Um, Half the time people were on their phones or talking about completely unrelated things. Like, is not great.
Yeah, I mean, that sucks. And I think part of that's just because it takes so long to get back to your turn.
Hmm.
That if you don't have a
Like,
party of fighters,
I don't blame them for getting distracted because there was just it was too much between their turns. So like obviously you're not going to be laser focused on everyone's turn all the time.
no, it's tough not to. And especially if you're playing a caster, like you need to be thinking about so many other things. Um,
Hmm.
so like, staying mentally engaged for that entire time, I think they also just kind of necessitate much larger gaming sessions in general.
Hmm.
Like if you're gonna sit down with 7 people, which I think 7 or 8 is probably the largest I've run. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but 7 or 8 people. Um, and I remember after I ran that initial like few campaigns or whatever in 3.5, like I really was not looking to do it again. And yet then again, I did it right away with Sagas when I ran my own Sagas game. Um,
Yeah, because that started with like 7 or 8 people too.
it did. Although we ended up cutting quite a few of those people out over time.
Well, they cut themselves out.
Yeah, I didn't make them feel welcome, though. Not all of them, anyways. Um,
It was really only one that I think didn't feel welcome,
yeah,
and I don't blame you for not making that one person feel welcome.
yeah, another kind of toxic person, which wasn't great. But but I mean, after that though, when I like after that Saga's campaign ended and we kind of moved on to the next thing, I was much more keen to try and keep the group size down to like 3 to 5, and really
Hmm.
nothing more than that.
Yep.
Um, and honestly, I think that that's probably like ideal. And I honestly really enjoy like just 3-person parties as well. I think that they add a really interesting dynamic to the game.
I can agree with that. I the Pathfinder game that I'm running now is 3 people, and I toyed with adding another party member, but like I don't know how that would change the dynamic because I think the dynamic in the party is really good right now.
Yeah, it's always a rough thing because I know with like with my current D&D campaign, you were the last player that we added in, but we've actually gone through
Hmm.
quite a few of them before you joined.
Yeah.
Um, and so like when we started, we had 4 people. It was Nick, Drew, his brother, Nick's brother, and that was it. Just those 4. And as we
Hmm.
kind of gone on, obviously, Dustin moved to Vegas, so I invited him because he knew nobody in
Hmm.
town other than his coworkers, and I wanted to be sociable.
Right.
So I added him, but shortly after that, Greg and Nick's brother dropped out.
Hmm.
So it was just the 3 of them for quite some time. Um, and honestly, that was a really fun party experience because what it does is it puts the party in a situation where they have to like make up for just holes in the party and find
Hmm.
clever solutions. So if they run into a locked door, well, there's no rogue in the party. You have a bard, a fighter, and a cleric. So their solutions to problems, even if they're really typical problems that parties have, are you know pretty
They
pretty
had to get
unique ones.
creative.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, so I mean that's one of those things that I really do like, and one of these days I do want to run like just like a 2-person game just to see what that feels like, just to see if maybe I enjoy that even more because obviously that starts to make it difficult to balance, but I think that once you get down to that point, um, Like I think that you're going to get even more creative, and I think the other thing too is that when you have fewer people, it lets you focus on their individual stories a little bit more closely.
Yeah, it definitely feels less like spread out with 3 to 4 people. Um, and I feel like a lot of people get more chance to shine with fewer people.
Yeah, Muse Rage in chat said you need helpful NPCs with 2 players. Um, I could see how helpful NPCs would be helpful, although I do always get really careful about adding NPCs to the party directly. I know, like with running shorthanded groups online, at least I see a lot of advice like, "Oh, create an NPC, squire or helper to like follow them and help them out with combat." And I really don't think that that's a good avenue to go. Um, Obviously with them not being a character who has a lot of agency, like a squire or like a slave or whatever, um, that helps in that they're not going to be constantly deferring to the DM to make important decisions. But what I think that it does is it means that the DM is spending more time in combat than they really needed to. When like combat can already be a bit of a slog, and with the 2 people, it's not as bad. Yeah, not permanent party members, he says, and I can see that for sure. Um, I think that with 2 players, you definitely want to run a really careful balance. You don't want full blown party members with them, where they're like joining
Mm-hmm.
them for every dungeon and hanging out or whatever. But I do think that when they're shorthanded like that, depending on the campaign, they're really going to be pressed for resources and their ability to kind of handle different challenges. So I think the inner character stuff is going to be a lot more important for those people, as far as just kind of like pooling the resources that they do have to get things done. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I mean, I think it depends. Um, because my party that I'm running now, for most of the campaign so far, I had a permanent party member NPC, and the character was largely independent.
Hmm.
Like it was basically me playing a character that I would normally play. Um, and they did a lot. The party did a really good job of not asking that NPC too many questions that I, the DM, would have to answer. So I think it depends on the group.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
guess some trust there maybe.
but at the same time, I also just in the last couple of sessions took that character away from them, and they don't know what to do with their lives now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the risk that I always am really careful about avoiding is it's okay to add NPCs to the group, but you want to make sure that they're not being like factored into the decision making too much. Because then what ends up happening is they end up like even if it's subconscious, I think that they end up counting that character's vote as more serious than if they were just a player because if they're like, "Oh, well, should we go to X town or X town?" you know, depending on the DM, they might not necessarily be able to like, I prepared stuff in town A and not town B, so perhaps I'm going to judge, massage the party to go to town A. But if that keeps happening, they're just going to keep doing what I asked them to do, and that kind of takes away a little bit of the party agency, I think.
You broke up at the end there. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just saying, I think that as a DM, you may be subconsciously biased towards pointing the party in the direction of where you've prepared stuff. So if their option is to go to place A or place B, but you've prepped a dungeon for place A and nothing for place B, then your NPC may be more, apt to point them towards place A because you have stuff for that. And if that happens enough times over the course of of enough sessions, the player characters are going to start to defer to that NPC, not maybe directly, but it'll be implicit that that NPC kind of is the arrow, the compass that points towards the plot or points towards where they should go next over time, I think.
That could be. I haven't really. at least with this party, I haven't really seen too much of that.
Thankfully.
Um, it's more it's more the party wants the character back, so they're like, how do we do that? What do we do? We could do this quest, or we could go find this person.
It's like the exact opposite of my problem right now.
Well, listen. They don't even know how to keep their player characters as part of the party.
This is also true. I hope one of you is watching so you can feel that shade.
I hope they're all watching so they can feel the shame.
None of them are watching. Um,
Punks.
um, but maybe that's a little bit too self-indulgent to riff on that for too long. Um, so that's definitely one thing that I think is really interesting is how to handle NPCs. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Particularly like if you have like powerful NPCs or like NPCs that are like on a comparable level, or if they're even just dramatically weaker than the player characters. I think all those things kind of invite different problems. What are some of the things that you try out when it comes to DMing to try and make sure the player characters are not constantly getting curb stomped by better NPCs, but feel like they have a place? I guess is maybe the best way I could put it, without just like
Uh,
you know running roughshod over every small town they run into.
I cheat a lot. I'm
Okay.
I'm gonna be 100%. I cheat a lot as the DM. Um, I'll fudge AC and HP all day, every day to make the encounter more fun.
Mm,
um,
you are
and
not a
like
dice purist.
no, and like because I feel like combat encounters should not be curb stomps on either side. So if it feels like an encounter is going, the players are winning too dramatically, I
Mhm.
will just double somebody's HP, maybe all of them.
This guy suddenly is a problem.
Um, or like if if the players are taking way too much damage too early, I'll reduce their the NPC's attack rolls by like one or two.
Mm.
Um, and like I'm not gonna stop them from dying if the dice roll that way, but I don't want it to feel like I'm always giving them something they can't beat.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a delicate dance because you want it to feel like you don't want it to feel trivial
Yeah.
on one hand, but you also want to make sure that the party isn't just getting stomped all the time. Like it can't go either way too frequently. I think if you have a
Exactly.
campaign where the players never get a win, they just don't want to come back because the whole point of playing D&D for a lot of people is that power fantasy in some respect.
Mm-hmm.
I know it is for me in some level. And so if you just come in and it's like I don't get it, I'm a 15th level character and I am struggling. I'm struggling against these guys like every time, no matter what it is. And I think that you
These are
want
just
that kind of
some
reward.
goblins. Why can't I kill one?
Sometimes players need a controlled stomp as a wake up. Just have an enemy that walks away.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Muse Rage, 100%.
It's such a good thing to do too. Like one thing that I did really early on with this party because I was running a party with all new players, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I started this particular campaign that I'm running when I moved to Vegas, none of them had ever played D&D before, and only one of them had even really heard of it. Um, so like
Oof.
I'm basically starting from zero.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was the first encounter was just a bunch of goblins just to get them used to the core mechanics. Second fight, they had to run. There was no winning. Like I think there were all it was four level one characters and a couple of NPCs, and I had them fight like one Onkeg or whatever. It's like a giant burrowing ant thing. It's like CR2, right? It has like an acid spit weapon attack or whatever that could outright
Sure,
kill one or two of them, like depending on
sure.
the
It's
roll.
it's literally double what their challenge rating is. So
Yeah,
like,
and the best thing is that they barely managed to kill it. Like they actually managed to take it down. And then like six more showed up because they're in the middle of a nest. And then it just became, all right, we need to run away. What are the running away rules? We need to know those really quick. In fact, I had to kill an NPC before it died. So like, and one that was like going ham, just to kind of
Oof.
really reiterate, like, you know, things are not going well. King Flink here. Third session of VC. Have all of you curb stomped by an angel until Robert and Jacob ruined my fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was definitely a thing. I will say that that particular fight, um, King Flink, because we were actually both there for that. Well, I was there for like half of it, um, but I will say that that particular session was really memorable for me as a player. Just because it was a fight that really felt like it kind of ebbed and flowed in a way that was really engaging, right? Because
Hmm.
for a good chunk of it, like we were struggling through it, and there were creative solutions here and there to try and resolve the fight, and like it would always seem like it was just barely working, and then it wasn't. It was really really good pacing on your part for that particular fight. Um,
Hmm.
and to me, that's like to this day probably one of the more memorable combat encounters that I've been a part of. Even though I was only there for half of it. um,
It
oh,
also felt like everybody, even like the lowest common denominator of the party, got a chance to be useful and shine.
mhm.
Because even Lu Tai was instrumental in our bare victory.
Yeah. And in this case, victory was delaying him long enough to make sure we didn't all die, right?
Exactly.
But I think that it's okay to move that goalpost, right? Once it becomes obvious that you can't kill an opponent, then I think it's okay as a DM to move that goalpost a little bit so that the players can kind of work out, like, okay, what's the new strategy? Um, but I think what's important is
Mm-hmm.
that you do need to give those players a win at some point. You can't have every fight be a very difficult struggle or one where they barely eke out a victory. I think that it's good for the player ego to have a few fights mixed in where they do get to just kind of own for a little bit, even if it's bad guys who seem kind of yeah, even if it's just bad guys that I think
I'm gonna be back in a second. I'm
sure,
gonna restart my Discord real quick.
sure, no problem, man. But yeah, so he wasn't instrumental. That was all Robert. I mean, Robert did help, but Lutai did freeze that pool, so there was that. So, but we'll just wait for Marvin to get back in. Are you back? So, chat, welcome in. If you're just hanging out, if you're just joining us, we're a couple of guys, a couple of DMs, just chatting about, well, the the DMing thing. Taigetsu just taking a brief break for a moment, just to restart his Discord so he can get back in. But yeah, I mean, if you guys have anything in chat you want to say, any questions, we're open to taking those. In the future, we're actually looking to have people join us as guests. So if that's something that you're interested in, um, we'll go ahead and leave a link in the video description, because I am going to be uploading this to YouTube. So so if you go to YouTube/Vladdviever, I'll have the this whole video, and in the description there I'll put a link to the Discord, um, so you guys can join, and then if you have a question, we can talk about it here. Even if it's like a super like hey, here's my campaign, I don't know what to do. What would you guys do? How would you handle that? Because I think that would be fun.
I'm back.
Welcome back. I was just telling them that I'll put the link to the Discord in the video description. Yep.
So you've briefed them on our plan for future episodes to
Yeah,
have
just
guest speakers and
yeah, briefly. But you can feel free
audience
to add your
engagement.
yeah, that thing, right? That's a buzzword to have. So yeah, but if you have an idea, if you have a question, if you're in your campaign and you're stuck, let us know. I'll probably throw together an email to field questions that way if that's your preferred method. But I'll put a link in the Discord, and we'll kind of work out the rules for that. Probably no more than one guest at a time, just to keep things kind of organized. But But yeah, that was kind of the plan in the future. Encounter strategy, yeah, I'm actually pretty big on that. And it's something that I think is gonna piss off some people, depending on their approach, because I've definitely known some DMs who are real like dice purists, and I think that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people do get really hung up on like encounter balancing. Like I don't know how to balance this encounter when like for you and that for me as well, it's a much more dynamic thing. I don't just set the stats and then go with it. Like I'm making adjustments here and there depending on what's going on.
Um, I will say that sometimes, usually for like more important to me encounters, boss fights, things with story relevance, I will sometimes just make stats and keep it exactly how it is, all the way through the encounter, no adjustments.
Hmm.
A lot of times it's when I know for a fact that the encounter is challenging. Um, Usually something like a cult leader towards the end of a campaign that's like trying to resurrect a dead god or something. Uh, Something like that. I will almost always try to have an actually balanced encounter with no adjustments in the middle. Um,
Yeah.
Players be damned. um, but yeah, like King Flink said, it's mostly for like boss fights and stuff like that where I won't adjust. And if they die, they die. I'm not above a TPK.
So I'm not generally either, but like I've had significantly less of those than a lot of people. Um, I think for me, I will stat out boss fights. I will plan out like key encounters, and I do find that moving to digital has made me way more likely to actually plan stuff in advance than if I ever did it in paper. Um, I don't know what it is, but like I think because the way that Roll20 is set up in particular, the way that like you kind of have to like draw and plan everything in advance, I am
Mm-hmm.
definitely like way more likely to put stuff in. Like I have actual monsters statted now. Like what? What is going on here? I have like multiple NPCs. I have a whole folder. This is way more organized than I ever was in paper. Um, so I think it's partly the convenience of having the repository there.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's also a number of these monsters that just have no stats whatsoever. Like, it's just a token, right? Like, this is just a token. There's no character sheet, right? It's literally just a pog to put onto the board. And when it comes time to fighting those things, like, I'll just kind of run it loosely. What sounds like a good number of HP to give that guy? I'm feeling like a 75 today. My players do about 36 a hit, so I'll make him like 2 to 3 hits, and that's how I'll kind of run it. But for the big fights, I definitely will stat stuff out. And I know that you guys have seen some of the stat blocks I've put together for like major NPCs, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Like John here, for instance. Like obviously he's been statted to high heaven because this was a whole planned boss encounter that you guys kind of friendshipped instead.
Yeah, we Naruto'd this guy.
You definitely did.
He
Um,
was gonna fucking murder us. We were not gonna win this one.
so this is going to be one of those situations where like I was planning on this being like I start like when I'm looking at the boss fight, I kind of think about it in two directions, right? Either one, I want the fight to be really, really difficult, and so I'll start kind of at a midpoint, and then I'll kind of adjust mid combat up or down. With this though, I've been hyping this guy up since for episodes and episodes, for sessions and sessions. That is, so I started really high, and if things started to go south, I did have some story routes I could pursue to turn this into not a total murder fest, right? Um,
Yeah,
But I definitely
I
took his
think he
legendary
still would have
actions
died
away.
anyways.
I definitely took his legendary actions away though when he joined your party.
I mean, yeah, you don't want to give legendary actions to
To a
an
player.
NPC that's helpful.
So but you know what? I think that's like that's one way you could do it. But like by comparison to that, like there was the other boss monster you fought, the Kyoki. Like
Yeah, the
you guys
spirit.
you guys nearly two rounded that thing. I like tripled its HP and gave it a healing factor to make it relevant.
Uh, I'm gonna be honest. I blame Dustin for how quote unquote easy that fight was, even though I almost died more than once.
Yeah, I think I still have its stats in here somewhere. Um, so I think I have it set up for.
It was at the bottom, like
Yeah,
the very bottom.
oh, there it is. It doesn't put it back into the thing. So like for Kyoki here, I think for two things were going on here. I was kind of doing like a gimmicky mechanic that I didn't exactly test play ahead of time, so it didn't
Hmm.
exactly run into like into the later areas. But it did kind of put a weird time limit on the fight, so there was that. But
Yep.
like this thing's starting HP was 346. I think I ended up giving it like a healing factor of like 15 HP a round or something, just to like help it keep up with you guys damage wise.
Yeah, because it was it was tough because there were four of us and nothing really to distract us from just throwing all of our highest damage things at it.
Hmm.
Um, and Dustin getting sneak attack all
Every
the
round.
time was not was not helpful for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily plan around that all that often, to be
Yeah.
honest. I am this time. Um, he's not gonna like it, but
Thank God. I listen. I like sneak attack as much as the next guy, but like I hate when you always have sneak attack up. It feels super shitty.
yeah, I could see that. Um, so I think that but like kind
I
of get
say having a backup character who always does sneak attack damage.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me as much, to be honest. And like even if he sneak attacks every single boss that I make from here on out, like that's fine. Because the reality is that he's basically a glass cannon anyways. It doesn't take much focused effort to actually completely kill his character, if I really want to.
True.
And I think the like and I think that that's part of it, right? Like if you build a character who is really good at picking locks, as a DM you want to put locks in front of them for them to pick, right? You don't want
Mm-hmm.
to continuously, say fuck you for focusing on your stupid picking lock or whatever, your, guaranteed minimum 26 in the in the skill check or whatever. Like that's dumb. If I make a character who's really good at a thing, I want to give an opportunities to be really good at that thing. Um,
True.
and so like that's why I'm fine with it a lot of the time. Um, where it's like, ooh, I get sneak attack all the time in this room because the whole thing is in pitch blackness, and that's why I get sneak attack. Okay, that's cool. This NPC can teleport people. How do you like being on the other side of a wall? Not great. Didn't think so.
How do you like being inside a wall?
Yeah, I will say that was probably one of the most entertaining mechanics I've ever put on an NPC. Was the ability to switch your positions.
Yeah, I that was frustrating.
like,
I'm just gonna leave it at that. That was frustrating.
like, why can he do this? Like
Uh,
I think it's good to throw a wrench into like the standard strategy every once in a while, right?
mm-hmm.
Does it suck for the mage who was like 60 feet away and is now suddenly in melee range? Yeah, but you know what? I think that's funny.
That's why I'm proficient with armor.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good one. Um, but again, I think the key thing though for that was just like it's important to be able to kind of work on your toes and kind of adjust what's going on based on the information that you're getting in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And also to like know when you have to do that. Like this was like again it was a boss monster that was kind of hyped up over a couple of sessions. You want it to be climactic. You don't want the players to kill it in 2 rounds. That's not fun. I mean, the players are going to feel awesome about it, but like it's not gonna. It's just going to be a footnote.
It's
And
not going to be rewarding.
yeah. And then the other thing you run into as well is if you do that too often, where the players are just rolling through your encounters, they're going to start to have a really distorted view on where they are in the pecking order of the world, like as far as like combat is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Like like I disintegrated one of the player characters, right? Like yeah, I brought him back, but like that sits with people. They remember that next time they go and fight somebody who's like in charge of a thing and it might be magical, right? I
Yeah,
I certainly
yeah.
hope that they're not going to just like walk into the final boss encounter that I have planned at the end of the campaign and not think about what the guy can do, given that they've seen him kill somebody with just a touch at this point, right? Um,
And I think they've definitely learned their lesson.
I don't know about that, but we're gonna keep hoping.
At least Andrew learned his lesson.
Andrew definitely learned his lesson. Andrew was not about that.
At
Uh,
the very least, he understands that he can't just throw combat spells at everything.
this is true. Um, but as far as like monster strategy is concerned, there was a website that I have gone to. The monsters know what they're doing. Have you been to that site before?
I haven't.
It's a really good resource. Where the guy I forgot the guy's name, unfortunately. But basically, it's a website where they go through like every monster's stat block and like their character information and their creature information, and describe what strategy would make sense for that creature to employ,
Huh,
like heuristics wise.
that's pretty dope.
It's a really good resource because I think sometimes the six stats are kind of difficult to kind of interpret how that like how that works. Like one really good example is like a giant spider versus a phase spider, right? A giant spider is like as intelligent as like a dog, right? So just like not super, like not dumb, but like not super intelligent. A phase spider has like a 13 intelligence. Like it's smarter than most people, and that means that when you play a phase spider as a enemy NPC, you should be a lot more dangerous with that thing because it's going to be looking for strategy. It's going to be looking for opportunities to kind of expose the player characters. It's going to be utilizing its abilities in an intelligent way. Um, and so like it helps you kind of identify those sorts of patterns with the way that stats are kind of built. And for me, at least, it helped me kind of think about NPCs a little bit differently. So that way, if you have a group of kobolds and a group of goblins, you can run those two encounters differently, even though they're both effectively lower level fodder creatures. Even though kobolds have a lot of meme memes about them being very dangerous.
Huh. Yeah, that makes sense. I can dig it.
Yeah, highly recommend if anyone's watching. I think he did a book too, with like a bunch of the entries or whatever. I listened to it on audiobook, but
Fancy.
But yeah, I guess I'll post the link in the description.
Not sponsored.
Yeah, not sponsored. But if he ever watches this, I love your stuff. It's made my campaigns a lot more dangerous. Um, like the players don't like it very much.
I like it.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's real good. Also, just like as a DM, like have your creatures flee. Like creatures don't like to fight to the death most of the time. Like, please have your creatures run away. Like I don't think that happens enough.
It definitely doesn't. Most things don't want to just die. If a lot of things see something going sideways, they'll leave.
Yeah, like I would say the only time that you should have a creature that will want to fight to the death is if it's like a single-minded like automaton or zombie or something like undead, right? Creatures that literally just do not rationalize at all, and have no survival instinct. Outside of that, anything that even if it has like a one or two intelligence, if it has any amount of wisdom at all that you could justify, uh, as a survival instinct of some sort, it'll probably leave it like when it's at like 50 or 40% HP, right? Um, most of the time if it has a means to escape, unless there's something in the description that says that the creature goes into like some like mindless fury or something or gets really upset. Other than that, the only other time you're going to have a character who's going to fight to the death is going to be something that's intelligent enough to like have a goal beyond its life, you know
Mm-hmm.
like an assassin for instance might fight to the death if its goal is to kill one target and then it isn't concerned about getting out.
Yes, Dylan. Death before dishonor for things with brains.
Yeah,
For humanoids and other things with real intelligence. It is 100% okay to have those things fight to the death.
yeah,
um, but like a pack of wolves aren't going to want to fight to the death most of the time.
Yeah, your Umber Hulk is not going to want to sit there and tussle to the death. Now, it might be that its survival instinct is not sophisticated enough for it to realize when it actually is in danger of dying. That's totally possible, right? Not every
Sometimes the
creature's.
survival instinct is you have to kill harder.
Yeah, well, I mean, even that, like, it might not rationalize what magic is, might not understand that kind of strategy, right?
Hmm.
It might not understand that, the situation warrants more concern. So if it's like a big dumb ogre, for instance, like, it might see itself as the stronger opponent, even though there's a team of 6 mages there. It doesn't realize the danger that it's in because it is only observing based off of physical prowess. It doesn't understand that, you know, magic can be make it more dangerous. My NPCs are
Hmm.
notorious cowards. Is that true?
Your PCs are notorious cowards.
Ooh, that cut deep.
It was supposed to.
um, I can't think of many NPCs that I've run um, where they were like active cowards. Perhaps that's a trope I should look into more frequently.
I
Um,
mean, those have to be like
Infrequent.
they have to be infrequent, and it's so hard to make like a cowardly character an antagonist for any amount of time.
That's why you make them allies for right before the fighting starts.
Yeah,
Um,
fuck.
it's a really bad time to find out the make of someone's character, right?
Right before the boss fight with them,
Yeah.
where they're the boss.
So, um, so yeah. Ultimate coward, ultimate super fun guy you should trust. That sounds like that sounds like he's not serious, but um
He is a coward. I know this NPC. Definitely a coward.
all right.
Never trust him, Alan.
Um but yeah, so I think that, like, kind of to circle back to the original topic, as far as like starting your own group, just ask people that you know, and you might be surprised who would be willing to give it a shot. Um it's not nearly as nerdy a hobby as it really is. Like, it's not perceived that way anymore, and there are people who are not remotely into fantasy that may actually really enjoy aspects of the game. Um,
Hmm.
you just need to invite them and give them an opportunity to try it out. Um, do you have any tips for like new players? Like, if you're like a DM who's trying to get someone who's really new to the game to like join, how to kind of like foster a positive relationship with the games that they'll want to keep playing?
Um, Not being too strict early on. Like you wanna make sure that they understand that there are rules, but like new players aren't gonna remember everything immediately. You kind of have to give them a little bit of leeway, and you have to make sure all of the other players at the table, if they're not also new, understand that you're not showing favoritism. They just don't know how to play. Um, I also think like helping them understand what their stats actually mean and what their abilities can do outside of just what's written is really big for new players. Um, because I've seen a lot of people just one day they're not having any fun at all playing their sorcerer that they're playing as their first character,
Mm,
and then somebody will explain like, yeah, this spell can do this and this can make it so that you can't be seen for this amount of time, and you can do this to double this thing's range, and they immediately go, oh, that's so cool, and they start having fun immediately.
yeah, I think that for me, my biggest thing is kind of whatever it is that they want to make their character, let them make it. Like, try not to put too many limiters. You don't want to say no too frequently. for me at least, and I find that's really helpful. I agree, definitely. You want to be really patient because they're not going to understand the game very much. I think one of the biggest things that I see people do that turns people off to the game is telling people how to run their character or being judgy about people making suboptimal quote unquote decisions in the game. Um, there's no right way to play D&D. Like there's no right way to play Pathfinder. There's no right way to play sagas or whatever your game of choice is. The characters can make whatever decisions they want to make. They can play however they want to play. So if your new player is playing a bard and they just want to shoot a firebolt because they think that's the best thing that they should be doing, there shouldn't be other people at the table who are saying, "No, you really should cast haste this turn. It's going to help us out the most." Or, "Oh, you should really give me a bardic inspiration since you're the bard and that's what you should be doing." I mean, you should make sure they're aware of their abilities, but you don't want to toe that line and dip into the like you should be doing this, you should do this. You should say, "Hey, here are some options available to you." And if they pick an option that's not as, optimal, quote unquote, fine. Like that's okay. And if they make a decision that's ultimately not a very good one, let them live with that too. I think that it's important to not have too many take backsies when you're playing the game, but allow them periodically, um, at least from my perspective.
I can definitely agree with that. Um, a very good example is that one time a couple of months ago when Nick fireballed me.
Yeah, was that a couple months ago now? Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that was like November ish.
Yeah, and like that wasn't
Um,
the first time that that him as the player has done something like that, right? Um,
mm-hmm,
where like he makes a decision, doesn't really look through the ramifications of it, but that's fine. Like I think that what you shouldn't do is like continuously criticize that player for a poor decision. I think a good example is same player, Nick. He's a new player. This is the first character he's ever played, right? Um,
mm-hmm,
and so even though he had some familiarity with what D&D was, he had watched Critical Role season one, like series one, whatever. So like, he was
mm-hmm.
somewhat familiar with the concept of the game, but he never personally played. So early on, they had an encounter with an assassin. They lived. He ran into the assassin when he was alone, and they had a conversation afterwards because the assassin wasn't on job anymore. In fact, he got kicked out of his assassin group because he failed his mark, and now he's on the run from the same group. Um, and so immediately after that conversation, he launches a mind spike attack at the guy when he's just sitting down eating the rest of his meal, and like everybody else in the table like collectively groaned because they were like, "Ugh, why'd you do that?" Um, the guy had a magic necklace that would fire a lightning bolt at anybody who hit him, so of course he knew exactly who had hit him once the item did its thing, and thus initiated a fight that took the rest of the session. So so like obviously there was at least one player at the table who was really down about that situation, really upset because to them it's like, well, I had to sit through this entire session. I didn't get to play really for the last hour and a half because of this fight to the death that was happening. But for me, I think that the way you need to approach that is like it's not that he made a dumb decision. Like he made a decision and that was the result of it. He had to fight a
Mm-hmm.
character. And like it wasn't like he got off scot free. Like he went to death saving throws. Like him and the NPC killed each other in the same round. They both went down to zero, and he failed two death saving throws. He only got stabilized because somebody showed up to help out, right? Um, so it wasn't like it was without consequence either. Um, and obviously they lost a potential ally in that situation as well. And sure, there's a lot of players who maybe would have played that situation differently. You know, maybe used him as an NPC that they could tap for assistance later on, because obviously he's a skilled assassin. He probably has a skill set that might be useful at some point. But he wanted to use his spell to follow him. Didn't think about the fact that it did actual damage and that might upset him, and had to live with his decision. So like be invested in the other people's stories. Like if you're a new player at the table, like it's also important to or even if you're an old player, be invested in what's going on with the other people at your table because you're not the main character. Everybody, the whole group is, And so, just by mathematics, the story is really going to be like this. The game is only going to be focused on you for maybe a third of the time. And if you're only having fun for the third of the session where we're talking to your character alone, then you're not going to have a good time for most of the D&D game. You're going to end up getting, bored or focus on other things and tune yourself out. And I think that's another, issue that needs to get addressed with some players. And I think that's something that comes up.
It definitely does. But you know, those are conversations you have to have with individual players. Um, if you've already had it as a group, because you kind of do have to have it as a group conversation first.
Mm,
Um, at least in my experience, because otherwise people tend to feel like you're attacking them, and even if that's not your intention, um, that's how they feel.
mm.
But you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's something to keep in mind is that like there's kind of like an implicit social contract with the people at the table.
mm-hmm,
And I think it's really important not to betray that, right? Like
yeah,
everyone gets a moment to have their character be cool or be goofy, and sometimes when the character makes a quote unquote suboptimal decision, that could lead to some of the most interesting parts of the campaign, and
mm-hmm,
you just have to let it happen, right? Like, and again, not to keep bringing up the same campaign over and over again, but we had a whole situation where, you know, one of the players didn't take a hostage situation seriously, and they got their VIP that they were escorting shot in the head and killed. Oops. So then
big
what
oof.
followed was a was a 10-day scramble to find a diamond to bring the guy back to life because they didn't have any, and they were in the middle of the ocean. So, um, but like that can be really fun. That's a great plot hook, right?
Mm-hmm,
And I think that there's a lot of I think that sometimes there's that concern of like, oh, well, I always have to make the right decision, and if I as a DM let the players make the wrong decision, then I need to change things so that it's not a bad decision anymore. Like they're afraid to let their players fail. And while I don't think they should let the players fail completely all the time, like I don't think they should just die to a random mob, I do think that having failures of both character and of kind of heroics, I think help build up the game and lead to really interesting moments later down the road if you're willing to kind of readjust your story to do
I didn't get any of that.
it. um, so
I hate Discord sometimes.
yeah, sometimes it just does a thing, right? What was the last thing you heard? I guess.
Uh, when they had to revive the VIP with the
Right.
diamond.
Um, what's great is that the final recording is going to have my perfect audio, so they're going to hear it twice. But basically, the gist of it was that it's important to let the characters have failings, both of like their heroics as well as their like personal character failings, because those, if you're willing to make the adjustment on the fly, can really lead to interesting plot hooks that you might not have thought of otherwise. I couldn't personally engineer a hostage situation that goes poorly. That's something that only happens if the players make a series of decisions that don't go well for them, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's true.
So, I think it's important to, like, as a DM, be flexible. Don't stick. It's good to have a plan, but I don't think it's important to stick to it all the time.
Uh, railroading, I think, is the thing you're trying to discourage here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a question we can ask. Like, what's your stance on railroading? How do you feel about it?
I'm not a fan. Uh, as a DM, my games are usually super open,
Hmm.
and you can, if you can figure out a way to get somewhere, you can go there. Um, I don't put walls. I don't put too many reasons to force anyone to go anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, I'll nudge. I'll say like I wanted my players in my current game to do a loop around the region that they started in. And I was like, there's these temples. If you go to all these temples and talk to all these people, and come back here, we'll give you money. And in that group, with two of the characters being bounty hunters, that was exactly the kind of nudge they needed to do it. They just, their character's goal is to make money. Somebody promised them money to do a thing, so they did the thing. But if they had decided not to, I absolutely would not have had anybody be like, "Hey, go here."
Yeah. I guess before I answer, what do you think my stance on this is going to be?
Oh, I know your stance.
Do you?
You listen. You gave us the tool to travel the entire multiverse, and you said this was a mistake. That's too much freedom.
I did give you a tool to travel the multiverse, but
Um,
it is a
but
limited tool.
but you also, we have tried to go other places, and you have not stopped us. We've we've opened portals, and if we had gone through those portals and stayed there, we just wouldn't have made any of the deadlines that the other players have.
So do you think that the presence of a do you think the presence of a deadline would not be a form of railroading?
I mean, it's a deadline for them. They are choosing to keep the deadline. They could absolutely choose not to. And what's going to happen? Two people die? Ooh, big whoop. I don't even know one of them.
I mean, it's more than two people. Um,
I
so
don't know that.
no, you don't know that in character. I don't think they know that in character. I think they just have a
They
hunch.
absolutely do not.
They just have a hunch. Um, so so my stance on railroading has changed a bit, but my core strategy is fundamentally the same. Um,
Hmm.
I design a broad strokes plot, and I try to have the same events happen almost regardless of where you go. Now,
I do the
dipped
same thing.
I've dipped my toe into being a little bit more free with how I allow that structure to happen. But like I've definitely had situations where it's like you can go to X town or X town, and here's the trick: they're the same town. Like
Hmm.
whether you went north to to Scarsborough, or if you went north south to Qatari or wherever, I had the same thing planned. It's going to be the same thing. And then if you go to the other town later, I'll just make it a different town. Um, so I think that like as a DM, you can kind of create the illusion of free choice while actually putting your thumb on the scale, as it were. So in this instance of like you guys do have the ability to travel to one of four different worlds right now, right? You can travel to Kamigawa, Ravnica, Dominaria, and Dega, and now Alara. So five, right?
Hmm.
But the thing is that you don't really have business on any of those worlds, right? There is the
Hmm.
overarching like thing. Hey, the reason we're traveling is so we can go rescue our buddy. That's why we're doing this in the first place. We happen to find this item, so we have a means to go and do it,
Hmm.
and that's why we're doing it. And now we have to meet, an NPC at a certain place by a certain day, and it seemed kind of ominous, and he kind of tricked us into starting a civil war, so we probably should go check on it. Those are kind of like, you know, kind of like the bumpers on your bowling lane, and you
Hmm.
guys are just the bowling ball kind of rocketing back and forth between whatever. I don't really care what you guys do in the meantime, but I've kind of structured the story such that I don't need you guys to make the deadline. I'm trying to keep things going in the background whether you guys are there or not, and I think that's maybe one of the biggest changes I've had from when I ran my first D&D campaign to the one that I'm running now, is that I am trying to continue to put up the effort that makes it appear as though things are happening outside of the periphery of the player's intervention. So that way, when you guys do meet back up with NPCs and such, it feels like things have changed. Like the world continues to exist in the absence of your characters being there. which is something I think that I've only recently gotten okay at, as opposed to like, you know, my first D&D attempts as a DM, certainly, and then even to a lesser extent the Sagas game that I ran with you guys. I think that I could have done
Mm-hmm.
a better job there as well, because that campaign definitely was on rails for basically all of it. Although I guess I would be interested to know if you felt that way when you were playing it. Um,
Um. So the thing is, with with the Star Wars game, and then I'll come back to the broader topic. Um, I actually don't remember a whole lot of it before Bobby joined,
mm-hmm.
and we didn't. It didn't feel like we were being forced in a direction because he hired us to do a thing, and we accepted his uh his job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a party, we talked it over. Even with the NPC who was technically in charge of all of us, we all discussed it and agreed to do it as a group anyways. So it didn't feel railroaded, just because we discussed it as a party and came to the decision to do what you wanted us to do anyways.
Does the fact that Bobby was the bad guy the whole time change the perspective on that conversation?
I mean, the fact that Bobby ended up being the bad guy changes my perspective on every interaction that we had with him ever.
Hopefully for the better.
Oh yeah, I think Harry Fordson became an infinitely better character after the reveal that he was not Harry Fordson.
Honestly, it's probably one of the most ingenious things that I've ever like tried to put to paper is making a literal gimmick character to be the NPC in disguise, and no one would ever question it because he's an effing gimmick. He's a
His
he,
name was Harry Fordson.
it's a Harrison Ford analog. He's Indiana Jones in Star Wars. There's no way that anybody's gonna look at this and say something's fishy about this guy, even though there's a ton of red flags.
Mm-hmm. So like that definitely felt like we were making decisions, and we were kind of in control of whether or not we went in a direction.
Even though the bad guy
Um,
was working for me and thus kind of pointing you in the direction that I wanted you to go anyway.
yeah, but that's why it was good, because like we didn't know he was working for you.
The bumpers were there, but they were clear.
Yeah, it was transparent, and we bowled a strike anyways.
That's a really good.
Like
That's a good way to take the analogy and make it your own.
like but as far as going back to what you were saying about um having things move on in the background, um that's definitely something that I've been doing for the last few years. Maybe since like 2016.
Mm,
um I will have things that I plan to happen, and they will still happen whether or not the players go there. Um, one good example is in 2017, I was running a game for some mostly new players with one person who had played maybe 3 or 4 times before.
mm,
Um, and I said, "This is the world. Do you want your characters to have known each other beforehand or not? It's your choice. Whatever." And they're like, "We're starting in this town, I guess. We all know each other, sort of." I was like, "Cool, that's fine." And I had this whole plot planned for one area where a dragon decided it just wanted to start eating people.
as you do.
Um, and another plot for a different part of the world where there was a zombie horde like taking over a major city. Um, and the zombie horde thing is the thing they decided to go towards. Call to Adventure took them to the zombies. Um, and later on, they eventually make their way to the town where the dragon was eating people, and the dragon is now like living in the town square,
Well,
and like once a day, he forces somebody to be brought to him that he can eat, and he's now subjugated the town instead of, you know, they have a chance to stop him before he eats too many people. Now he's just doing it in the open.
yeah, and I like that because what it does is it takes a player decision and it makes it feel like it had consequence,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than stuff happening for seemingly no reason. Like,
Yeah.
you don't want it to feel like Deus Ex Machina, where it's like, oh, things are happening. It's like, oh, well, conveniently, this, things happen to work out. We found a super weapon over here, and it helped us, win the day. That feels awfully convenient.
Yeah.
But when you have something happen as a consequence of the player's action or inaction, that feels more interesting. So to draw from my current campaign, the players had to go find a diamond for the VIP person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they the only place they could find a diamond that was nearby was in a dragon horde. Basically, they were contracted by some cultists to go steal a statue that had some diamonds in it. So you guys stole some diamonds that no, stole a statue that had diamonds and gave the cultist the statue after prying out the diamonds. Um, but hey, steal stuff from a dragon, do stupid things, win stupid prizes. Um, the next time they found out about what happened to the town, the dragon came and leveled it because that's where they went after they stole the diamonds. And you don't steal from a dragon's horde and have no consequences. So like, you know, they caused a town to get wiped off the map, which in turn was caused because, one of my players decided to, you know, not take a hostage situation seriously. Which in turn happened because one of my players didn't realize that fire can ignite wooden boats.
Uh, mm. I had a similar experience with Alan.
Oh no. Um, so one thing I did want to ask you about though, that you had kind of
Yeah.
mentioned was the idea of like your characters knowing each other from the start.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your like tried and true methods of like starting like this session? Like, are you a big proponent of session zero? When you do run a session one, like, how do you get do you just have them walk into a bar and like that's how it goes, or how do you start your campaigns?
Uh, Honestly, it usually depends on the tone of the game that we're going for. Um, because I usually do have a session zero
Hmm.
where we talk about, everybody's goals and whatnot and character creation. Um, so for my current campaign, I'll use this as an example. Two of my players knew each other and were working together for quite a while before the campaign started,
Hmm.
and the third player, uh, he had just been fired from his gladiator job for reasons, and they were watching his last match.
I see.
Um, so they end up meeting as he's leaving immediately after getting fired, and they're walking out of the arena after the last match. They happen to be going in the same direction, and that's kind of how they meet. They're just walking in the same general direction, and if somebody's following you all the way across town and they're definitely noticeable, you're not gonna just ignore them.
I see. So there, you're kind of doing the best of both worlds in a way where you kind of fabricate a extended relationship between the two player characters, but then also have a new character introduced as well that they don't necessarily know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the major campaigns that I've run, I've kind of done a few different things. The first one that I did, well, the first couple of them I did, I set it up so that basically, like, here's the end point. Like, I'll kind of explain, like, all right, the beginning of session one, your character is going to be in X place, right? First campaign I did, your characters are all, living in this monastery. Like, I don't care
Mm-hmm.
what your class is, I don't care what your like story, what your thing is, but all of your characters grew up in this monastery. This is where you guys, grew up and lived. That's going to be your backstory. You all know each other and have known each other for some time.
Sure.
Um, but like how you developed your abilities, things like that, that's going to be on you guys. And that's how I did my first campaign, and that was okay, but it was a little bit restrictive for the players. Ultimately, they didn't really have much of a backstory beyond we grew up here, and that kind of sucked because it meant that like any sort of development that had to happen with that character, I had to happen over the course of as we learned how to play.
Yeah.
The Sagas game I did a little bit differently, but it was still largely the same, where I basically set an end point to everyone's backstory. Everyone's backstory has to end with them joining the crew of this ship, which I cannot say for because it's not safe for work. But everyone has to join the crew of this ship that we will not name. Um, I don't care what your character did prior to joining this crew, but that's where your journey needs to end. And I think that
So the
that
new one can start.
exactly, and I think that that was a really helpful prompt because one thing that's really intimidating is kind of like creating a backstory from nothing, particularly for new
Yep.
players. So I think if you give them kind of like a prompt or something to end at, it gives them the idea on the kind of like, all right, I can kind of work backwards from there. What was I doing immediately beforehand? How long have I been on the ship? Things like that. And you can
Mm.
start to do it that way. Um, I used a similar strategy for the current campaign where I don't care what your character was doing beforehand, but your character ends on this caravan traveling to this city for your own reasons, but that's what you need to be doing. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had the caravan get attacked by some goblins, and that's the call to adventure, right? Um, so I think that like I like that particular method just because it has a nice combination of giving the players freedom, but also letting me have a standard start point that isn't just you guys are six people in a bar and
Yeah.
someone runs in and says there's a witch in the woods that just took my son, and like that's fine, like if that's what you got to do, it's what you got to do. But for me, I think that you can get a lot more out of it if you start to ask them some questions about who their character is prior to the game starting.
I agree. I can definitely agree with that. Um, and sort of the same as what you were doing. Uh, the last DM whose campaign I joined before yours,
Hmm.
he said, "You are in this bar, but how you get to the bar up to this point is your choice. This is a major harbor, so you can have come in from another country on a boat, and wherever that is, we can work that out. But you're all in this bar on this day. Any prior connections, you can have them or not, your choice. Um, and it's very similar to what you said, that the endpoint is common, um, while still giving the players a lot of freedom to work within their backstories. Um, and a lot of our characters were religious,
Hmm.
and we used that, we were like on a pilgrimage, because there's like one major religious place on this continent, and we had to pass through this port to get there.
Yeah, so that helps kind of serve as like a common fulcrum for like where people are meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know for so I guess since you had mentioned it, I'll ask. I'm terrible at running religion in games. Like I don't know what it is. I think I just don't have a lot of like real life experience with it. Um, like I mean I know enough to know that it's not for me personally, um, but what I mean is that like I haven't done a ton of like reading into like the literature, or into theology and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
like whenever I'm implementing faith into a game, it's always super ham-fisted. Um, like and it was really challenging for like my cleric player when he was playing a cleric, because like he would go to like a monastery and talk to like a priest, and it's like I don't know what that guidance sounds like. I'm gonna just make up some hammer analogies and hope that that sounds meaningful enough for him. Um, it's what I literally did for like 3 months until his character died. Um, every time it came up, and like it seemed to work. But I was wondering if you have had maybe like better experience. I know you're a little bit more well read when it comes to that sort of thing. So
Um, so the way I look at religions in D&D and most tabletop games isn't so much like you have to follow a religion so much as they all have, how do I put this? Um, they all have like common goals for the religion. Like Pharasma, the goddess of death in Pathfinder, um, is not so much a killing god, so much as like a passage god,
mhm,
and like proper death and against reincarnate or against resurrection and uh, reanimation. So like Pharasma priests will usually make most things a death reference, and it'll be like passage or cyclical, depending on whether or not like there's a reincarnation aspect in that world.
mhm.
And most people will in that religion will just be normal player character type characters. They'll just be people, and they will just have some rules that they have to follow. Um, like Pharasma priests and clerics have to destroy any undead they see.
It's just
Like,
like their moral duty.
yeah, it's literally just something they have to do. If somebody asks for death, they have to do their best to accommodate it because a person choosing their death is
Tenant.
the height of honor, choosing your own death, and the next highest honor is helping them achieve their death the way they want to. Um, so like things like that, and otherwise they're just normal people because in real life most people aren't defined entirely by their religion. They're people who follow a religion, and that's kind of how I treat it in game two.
I see. I mean, that definitely gives me some perspective. I think one thing that is like different in D&D though is that oftentimes there's like hard evidence that these deities exist in some capacity, whereas
Yeah.
of course in the real world we don't have the luxury of having such concrete evidence for the existence or lack thereof of divine beings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like it's a lot harder to play like a straight atheist or someone who doesn't believe in gods. I think in D&D like it's almost like you would have to be like comically like oblivious to not believe that gods
Well,
exist in that setting.
the way I see atheism in D&D isn't so much disbelief that the gods exist, but rather disbelief that they're worth following.
Yeah,
That's how I usually look at it.
or I guess doubting their intentions or something along those lines, right?
Yeah. Um and like one atheist character I played uh just straight up was like the gods are trash. There's no reason for me to even consider following them because they're people with more power than me. So like all I have to do is get more powerful than them.
Tall order.
And like for the most part in D&D that is really what the gods are. They're not, their divinity is in their power, not in their creation.
Mm,
Because most gods also can't create something from nothing. Um, they're very much like Greek gods. They have to, if they want to create life, they have to have components.
yeah, it's like they need to like take clay from the earth and things like that.
Yeah. So like atheist characters don't not believe in them. They just don't think they're worth their time, or they think they don't have the people's best interests or something like that.
I can dig that. I will say that like designing a pantheon from scratch is definitely one of the more difficult challenges that I've ever undertaken as a DM.
Oh
Um,
yeah, 100%. Never doing that again.
Yeah, I did it once, and I swear to God, I'm going to use this entire, no pun intended. I'm going to use this pantheon for the rest of time. If it ever comes up, this is what it's going to be. Um,
I can definitely agree with that. Whew.
yeah, I
And
will.
it's especially frustrating when you're creating a pantheon because like
Half the work's never going to be seen by anybody.
half to two-thirds is never going to be seen, and also like gods aren't just a god of a thing. Like there's not just a god of lightning
Yeah.
in a good pantheon. A good
Mhm.
pantheon that doesn't have real world elements at least. It'll be like the god of storms, or the god of lightning and clouds, or the god of lightning and sailors.
Yeah, like for me, like when I was putting together, because for me it's like I have a new players join the campaign, back when I had this issue, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
great, I want to play a cleric. What gods can I pick? Ah,
Now I gotta think up gods.
yeah, because like it's established that I definitely don't have the gods um, from one of the traditional campaigns. So it's like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
you want to play a war cleric? I guess I'm going to start making up a war god, right? And so like when we got to it, this is Rith of the Allhammer, which yeah, I'm going to steal some epitaphs when I hear a good one. But like I made it a god of the forge, a god of war, and a god of light, and
Mm-hmm.
so that all comes together to me to have a creation myth where like this is the god that created the world, because I think that
Sure.
that's a cool thing. And obviously, the light being representative of bringing light to the world for the first time, the forge being representative of creating it in the first place, and war being representative of this is why the world was brought into play, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that's the creation myth of the world, right? But I can't just have one deity, so now I have to make others. So I'm like, all right, well, how am I going to break it down? The way I ended up doing it was I looked at the list of domains. I assigned 3 domains to all of the major gods and 2 domains to all of the minor ones,
Mm-hmm.
just as to kind of give me a framework to work within. And then from there, I started to outline the major gods, ensuring that none of the domains overlapped, and then the minor ones they could do whatever. So from there, I moved on to the next major god, which is for my pantheon, Baldura of the Final Lesson, which is a god of death, a god of the grave, and a god of knowledge. So
Mm-hmm.
grave being representative of like the passage aspect of death, kind of like how
Mm-hmm.
the Pathfinder deity is. Death being, of course, its own thing, causing death, seeking death, things like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
knowledge in this deity's space is representative that the final lesson is kind of the summation of all the things that you learned in life, and that the
Seems
knowledge
legit.
that all life leads to death. That's it. Um, and so like while I haven't had to expand on it, that at least has given me an outline where if anybody ever comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to play a grave cleric," or "Hey, I want to play a character who, you know, is a knowledge seeker. What are my options?" Okay, well, here's an option that's really interesting. I have a knowledge god that's also a death god. That's not something you see all the time, right?
True.
Um, so I think that it's so like for this pantheon, like going through, that's how I kind of structured everything. Just because I want to share, because I don't ever get to talk to this stuff about it with anybody. Um, so the last 2 major gods I did was Malik of the Perfect Circle, which was nature, life, and order. So
Mm-hmm.
very green, circle of life, nature. The order element is that the world is as it should be, and that aberrations to that natural cycle should be eliminated. And then the last one is Pelton of the Unseen Hand, which was
Mm-hmm.
Arcana, Tempest, and Trickery. So this is basically what your character in my current campaign would absolutely adore, minus the trickery part.
I mean, would I not like trickery?
Yeah, that's probably true. Um, and then for minor deities, I kind of try and take like an aspect that's kind of there in the original major ones and mold it into something that's a little bit different. So like for instance, for the final for Baldura, the final lesson, that was Death, Grave, and Knowledge. I then
Mm-hmm.
made Necra of the Empty Truth, which is knowledge and trickery. So
Okay.
which again is just playing on like, oh, it's seeking knowledge, but it's knowledge for potentially mischievous reasons, right? Um, Telling half truths and whole lies to is kind of the tenet of that particular thing. So like if I were to take your advice and kind of say like, all right, what would a follower of this deity want? I would say a follower of this religion probably feels that there's no reason to tell the truth if a lie would suffice.
I mean, yeah, that's that's kind of how that works.
you know. Um, and I guess the second tenet would probably be if you cannot tell the difference between if you cannot tell if something is a lie or not, then it's no different than the truth.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. I like that.
I found it as a quote somewhere. I don't remember where, but it's a really good one. You feel free to use it. I'm gonna write
I
that down.
might just do that.
I'm gonna write that down.
uh, oh, I really wish I could find the deities that I made for my pantheon, but I think they're on one of my old computers.
You know what? That's a quote from an anime. That's where I got that from. That's from Rocco, Brave of the Six Flowers. I bet. Oh no, Spice and Wolf. Sorry.
Mm.
Anyways, the short answer is don't go to these to followers of that deity for answers to actual questions. So, um, yeah, that was a tangent. So,
I mean, isn't that what you come to these kinds of shows for?
yeah, yeah, that's probably true. Um, but I think that it can be really rewarding to create that kind of outline, particularly if you want to just continue to use the same world over and over again. Because then, like one of the upsides of using the same campaign over and over again, or the same setting at least, is you get to really get familiar with it. So you can kind of offload some of the work that you have to do.
Yeah.
Like if you spend a whole campaign fleshing out one area of the world, if you do another campaign and you put it in another area of that world, if
You now have two very fleshed out areas.
yeah, exactly, right? So like for my home world, my home plane rather, like my initial campaign was set in in this elf dominated continent, but it also ended up being a little bit of a world spanning journey. It went down to like this island chain that they spent a lot of time in as well, right?
Hmm.
And so like the campaign that I'm currently running is set in the same place, or at least it's one of the worlds you can visit. And so I have this information that's still around, and not all of it's been relevant, but it's definitely helped me out as far as trying to keep some stuff in mind.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. For a few years, I ran all of my campaigns in the same world. Um,
Are you using
like
the same
in
one now?
no, it started off kind of as the same world, and then very quickly I was like, you know what, I want this to be a wholly unique experience. So one region is the same, and then the whole rest of the world is totally different.
Hmm. Yeah, I think not being married to one setting as well is also really helpful. Because like the thing is, this is like sometimes if you're starting out and you're really new at it, your first
Hmm.
crack at it's going to be really, really, really shitty. Let's be honest. Like
Oh
professional
yeah,
writers, we are not, and
oh
you're
yeah.
probably not either if you're taking this as advice. So be flexible. Don't try and flesh out a whole world at one time. Just focus on a small area. Um,
Um, my cousin is actually one of his friends is running their first campaign. I think it's their first campaign at least,
they should watch this show.
and they are fleshing out the whole world before they start the campaign. And I literally said to him, "Dude,
You'll never
that's a
finish.
fucking mistake."
It
I didn't even say he wouldn't finish because he might finish,
he
but
won't.
like that is that is way so. way too much to prepare when they're starting in literally like one town, and
Yeah.
you don't know if this campaign is going to go more than 4 sessions.
Yeah, you can't do that to yourself because the thing is this is like D&D is fundamentally different from a video game. In a video game there's set rules and parameters behind everything that you can do and where you can go. In D&D
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. And so if you spend your time trying to like write out the detail for every area for the entire world, like it's fractals. Like there's no end to it. You can keep going down
Mm-hmm.
the rabbit hole to create more and more detail and you'll never be finished. And especially with D&D, like this is just some life advice for you, right? Just start it. Whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, just do it. Don't spend time setting yourself goals and stuff like, oh, well, I'll do it once I have enough money, or I'll do it, next week, or I'll do it, you know, when
Okay,
I have
I'll do
time.
it next week is a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah,
That one's
but if
reasonable.
you actually follow through on it, though, like my point is that don't let yourself fall into the like moving the goalpost kind of
Mm-hmm.
mentality where you keep setting arbitrary lines in the sand for you to meet before you're ready to start the thing. I think that
Yeah.
stops a lot of people from doing a lot of stuff in life, but in particular for D&D, get the basics, just run the session. Because here's the thing, your players are going to do something you don't expect and you're going to have to throw it out anyways.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just don't bother. Like I'm not saying not to have an idea. I think it's really important to spend time thinking about the overarching stuff that's happening in your campaign. Um, but don't bother planning out most of it. Like it's because too much can change. Um, my campaign's total story has changed from session one. Session one, there was like a plot about like demons that had taken over the local government and had been forcing prisoners to sign their souls away. And like my players found evidence of all of this. And do you know what they did when they found out? They went to
Is
go
it nothing?
pursue. They went to go pursue one of the player character's revenge quests to go find his father.
Oh, that's so good.
That stuff is still happening. They had
Yeah, I
evidence.
know.
you know they had evidence that this was still happening. Like they stole evidence from a dungeon anyways. My point is that if I'd spent a ton of time like putting together a final dungeon and stuff for that or designing like a bunch of like related like tasks or whatever, it would have been time wasted. And I couldn't have predicted that the players would have collectively looked at that and said, you know what, that sounds like it's above my pay grade, we're going to go do something that we actually care about because none of us are from this city and we don't really care. And I'm like, yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense. Sure, we're going across the world because his quest was located on the other side of the world. So they spent 8 sessions traveling across the continent, and then spent another like 4 sessions traveling across the ocean after getting a boat, and then the rest of the plot started. Right? And this is where we are now. So if there's anything you can do, rely on your players to be chaos. It's hurting cats, and don't spend too much time working on something that might not see any use for you. As I get older, I have less and less time to dedicate to like doing D&D stuff. Um, so you have to be really conscious and really purposeful about the time that you do spend. So I thought you guys were an hour behind me. So Bastion, good news. On YouTube, YouTube/Vladdviever, which I will put in chat, I guess, right now.
I
Um,
literally just told him on Facebook exactly what you're about to say.
Great. Well, I'm going to be posting the video. So it's youtube.com. Boom. So I'm going to put all the videos there for all of these if you ever want to catch up on them. Or you could check out the VOD. They're going to be on Twitch for a little bit at least until, they age out or whatever. I don't actually know how that system works. You probably do. Um,
So if you have your VODs automatically saved,
mhm.
Twitch will keep them for 14 days, unless you're an affiliate, then or partner, then they'll save them for 60 days.
Oh, okay. That's not too bad.
No,
So,
no, it's not.
So yeah, this will be here for 14 days, I guess. So lucky you guys. Or just check it out on YouTube. I put all the stuff that I stream there. So um, yeah. but we got a little bit off topic there. Um, and
Did we though? Did we really?
mm, probably not. Um, but yeah, so your cousin's friend should watch this video and listen to our advice. Do not stat your whole world ahead of time. Just do the main bits that the players are going to interact with, probably. And if they interact with something that you're not planning, just make something up enough to get by. Like
Yeah,
you're the dungeon master. Your ability to bullshit is really helpful here, and it's helped me a lot in life to get good at this skill, which is pretending to know what you're doing even when it's not true.
yeah.
um,
Fake it till you make it, dude.
yeah, it can get you anywhere in life, I promise. Um, Although probably not a good idea to do that with math jobs. Math jobs, I've heard, probably shouldn't fake those. They find out
I
pretty quick.
mean,
Um, but outside of that, um, um, your players are going to do stuff all the time that you're not going to be able to anticipate, and it's really important to be on your toes about it. And I think one thing too, don't tell people no. Like one thing I definitely think we should never do as DMs is never tell a player no, you can't do that thing. And that's not to say that like I want to lift a 3,000 pound rock. Yeah, tell that person no. Their character probably can't do that. But if the player's like, I want to walk over and stab that guy, let him do it.
I mean, even if they go, I want to lift the 3,000 pound rock. My answer is always, you can try.
Yeah, and if they want to if they want to spend 3 days and take a 20 on it and still fail, they're more than welcome to do so. But I don't think we should ever approach the game from a position of taking away the player's autonomy. I think that if there's anything that you can do that is super harmful to your player's experience, is anytime that you're taking away your player's autonomy from what their character should do, would do, could do, etc. You've crossed into really dangerous territory to make that player feel disenfranchised.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I also don't think it's very helpful or conducive to the play group to be super strict with your players' character motivations and how they would approach things, even if it's something they said, because in the moment, what they want to do is more important than their patterns. Um, like if a character that is lawful good decides he wants to just go murder somebody, uh, I don't think we should ever say you can't do that. It's not what your character would do
Like you're a lawful
because
good character, you wouldn't do that. Like
yeah, like if they want to do it, let them do it, and then there will be, consequences. Maybe their alignment has to change now because they did it. Maybe if they're like a paladin, a lawful good paladin, they have to do some
atone.
kind of atonement to get their paladin abilities back. But
Or maybe they're just a
saying your
fallen paladin now. Um,
yeah, but like saying your character wouldn't do that, I don't think is good for the group either.
no, I don't think so. And I think to piggyback off that too, I think one thing that I'm a really big proponent of is that alignments are not set in stone. It's one of the dumbest systems in D&D in my opinion, so I don't usually follow it all that closely. But one thing I think is really important is that people in real life are not 100% consistent about basically anything.
Hmm.
Um, And so, if someone's lawful good, to me that doesn't say to me that this person would never break the law, would never murder somebody. I think it's all about the context and the situation, because there are definitely
Exactly.
situations where somebody would. Um, yeah, Bastion here is saying agency is very important. So is the consequences for their actions. Um, Again, I think that's something that I think DMs are too scared to do sometimes. Is like real consequences for people's actions. Um,
Hmm.
like one that I don't think gets pulled out enough for like murder hobos in particular is like the concept of a reputation,
Yep.
right? If you have um if you have a bunch of murder hobos in your party, which if you don't know, a murder hobo is basically a character who, A doesn't have a base of operations really, and just basically solves all of their problems through violence. Um one, that person's in character going to be regarded as a psychopath. Like, just straight
Yep.
up. Like, any person in that universe who hears about this person who just, like, violently murders a ton of people, guess what? They're not going to want to work with them. And eventually, if they continue on that path, they will start to get the attention of people who might actually be stronger than them. Um, and I think that that's okay to have, right? So if your party goes around just like murders a shopkeep, steals all the stuff in the shop, sure, they can do that. But maybe other shopkeepers no longer really want to do business with them because they heard about Phil last week and they don't want to be next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that catches the attention of a local lord. Maybe that lord, pulls a favor and gets some heroes of some renown to come look into the situation. Well, now you have player characters who are being effectively hunted down by someone who actually is a good person, and
Mm-hmm.
now they have to deal with that, right? Let's say they kill those heroes. Well, that doesn't go unnoticed.
Now
Perhaps,
they're hero killers. They're killing legit good guys that are well respected.
yeah. And you know what happens when that sort of thing happens? Countries might start to take notice. And so, even if they're able to single handedly kill a single person, there are few individuals who are going to be able to withstand the full military might of a nation once it becomes, once it comes to their attention that one of their guys got murked, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's important to kind of keep in mind the scaling and kind of the reputation aspect of the game, and to not limit people from doing it, right? Um, like my campaign, I have a harder time doing that because you guys can jump worlds and you're basically anonymous in most of them, but that's not everywhere. um,
Yeah, yeah. Look at those people who came to my world and decided they wanted to start doing stupid things.
yeah, like one of you has to like deal with the consequences of that, right?
I legit had to tell them we can't just start killing people.
Yeah, they're like, oh, maybe we should just go kill that guy. It's like, no.
Exactly, Flink. There's always a bigger fish.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, um, to kind of iterate. But I think that again, like the key thing is not to stop someone from doing it, and I think it's important not to take their agency. Like one thing that I had happen to me and I played only like 2 sessions in this game that I was invited to, and I knew
Mm-hmm.
immediately that it was not a good fit for me. Is during the description of a scene, the DM had told the player what their character was doing during the scene,
Huh.
and like, okay, sometimes that can be doable within reason. I was like, all right, that's a little bit concerning. Um, Later on, there was a discrepancy between like what a player thought their ability should be able to do and what the DM thought the ability should do. And so after a few minutes of arguing, he said, "You know what? Your character actually just stands in front of the fountain all day with their mouth open. That's what your character does for the day because they lost their patience and they want to punish that player." Like,
Wow.
I'm like, I shouldn't be here. This isn't D&D to me. Like, I
That's
mean,
not role playing.
that's not role
That's
playing. That's me watching somebody masturbate in the corner. Because because at that point the DM is just playing with themselves.
I mean, if that's what you're into, watching somebody masturbate in the corner, I mean, more
Yeah, like
power
you do
to you.
you. No shame, right? But like that's not what I want to do with my D&D time.
Exactly.
Um, I don't get anything out of that. So like that's something to be aware of as well. And I guess as a DM, that kind of like feeds back into one of the earlier points about like not having an NPC in the party for too long. Is as a player, you don't want to watch the dungeon master just play, just like play with their own characters, right? Let the players be the heroes. If you have a situation where there's a big fight going on, you shouldn't just have your NPC swoop in and solve the problem that the players were meant to solve. Like, if that was the case, then either A, adjust your problem so that the players can solve it, or make it such that the players can safely escape and then solve the problem another day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe once in a blue moon, is it okay to have a bigger fish come in and fix things? That's fine, but don't make it such that that character is always like at key moments is always coming in and taking away the thunder from that player group because that's gonna kill the mood.
Again, back to like the power fantasy thing that a lot of players come to this for. If somebody has to save you every time you fight something, you don't feel powerful.
quite the opposite, really. You feel you feel like, why was I even here? If
Mm-hmm.
Alexander the Great was going to show up and just conquer the Mongol hordes for me, then why did I bother at all? Like,
Yep.
because at that point you don't even feel like you were an integral part of.
Exactly.
So that's different than serving a smaller part in a bigger thing, though, which I think
Yeah.
is something that you can do. Like particularly for like larger battles, um, having smaller goals for those characters. Like let's say you do want to have a big situation where you have a bunch of like big named NPCs that are canonically should be stronger than the players at that particular point in the story. Okay, well, maybe those characters are dealing with the frontal forces, right? They're dealing with, fighting the large horde. But it's the player characters who are maybe a little bit more maneuverable or have a different skill set. Their job is to sneak around to the back end to, help flank or to help disable some siege engine or something. Give them another part that is equally as important and make sense for them to do it as opposed to somebody else. Because at that point, they'll feel like they were participating in that big battle and that
Mm-hmm.
their part was just as important, even if it wasn't the big flashy part. And even if in universe, most people don't know that they did that thing, that still will make the players feel like they were accomplished because at least in the small circle of the people who do know, they'll be recognized for their heroics. And I think that that's
I
a cool thing you
mean,
can do too.
like, yeah, that's Star Wars Episode 6. The heroes of Star Wars, most of them were on the moon or in the Death Star, and they weren't part of the big fleet attacking the Death Star, but their parts were just as important.
If not more so, right?
Exactly, because Han, Leia, and Chewie had to shut down the shields so that the fleet could actually make it to the Death Star. So like that's the kind of thing you want to do if you're doing those kinds of things. You want to Star Wars Episode 6. You want the players to have a part and have that part be important, but make it so that they have to do it. Somebody else isn't going to show up and fix it for them. They have to be the ones to do it.
Yeah, there's probably an incident in Star Wars where that the opposite happened and someone did come in and fix it, but I'm struggling to remember a specific instance.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, it happens, but like Episode 6 is what you want to go for with the players usually in those situations.
yeah,
Because once in a while, having Yoda come in and save Anakin and Obi-Wan when Dooku's beating them, like once in a while, that's fine. But you don't want it to be like the climactic final thing, and then you have to be saved by Yoda.
it's like, well, why didn't you send Yoda to do it? like,
Exactly.
like clearly, like he just made short work of this guy, and like I think that if you're writing your story that way, like maybe just be more cognizant of like character motivations and see if you can use that as a means to kind of help solve the problem. Like you don't want DM insert characters. Just how if you're reading fiction, you don't want to just like read it's like, "Oh, I get it. This is just George Lucas now." Like that's what I'm reading. This is just George Lucas if he was like 20 years younger and had a laser sword. Um, you want to have like characters with their own thoughts and motivations. And if those thoughts and motivations line up such that they would do a thing instead of the players, well, then maybe find something else for those players to do. And every
Yeah.
once in a while, you can find something for the players to do that's kind of along the same lines. But I think it's important not to let that NPC overstay their welcome.
Yeah.
Like like with John, for instance, like I just had that situation come up, right? Like John had a
Hmm.
very specific purpose that he was trying to accomplish with the party. Once that purpose was fulfilled, he pieced out and he's doing his own thing right now. And your characters
Hmm.
will reconvene at some point, and what the nature of that alliance will look like going forward will certainly be informed by that later interaction. But he's not just a dude who's just going to chill with you guys all throughout the entirety of the next several games or whatever. He has his own motivations behind why he's making the decisions that he's making,
Hmm.
and he's acting on those decisions as consistently as I can do it as a non-actor person.
And then even when our paths cross again and we work together again, it will be because the party's motivations match with what his motivations are, and to some extent we know what his motivations are, and we know that we're going to meet up because our motivations, well, everybody else in the party's motivations match up with that.
Yeah. And I think that's important, is to like keep those motivations in mind. I guess pro tip
Hmm.
for backstory building for new players too, something that comes up a lot that I think players don't think about often when they're new, is have a motivation for your character. Like have a reason that your character is adventuring. And I think one of the worst things you can do for a character backstory is I'm running away from something. Like I'm running away from something can be such a is in not like a pet peeve of mine, but it's a backstory I think sometimes gets used, and then gives that player no real motivation to do any further adventuring.
Yeah, because it's defined entirely by your past and not your future. Um, and like that doesn't give you a direction to go. It gives you a point you want to be away from, which it also gives you a lot of freedom, you know, to go in whatever direction you want, but you have to kind of have a direction, you
Yeah,
know.
well, that, and then also depending on the nature of the thing that you're running away from, adventuring could be actually counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
So, like for instance, in the Monday campaign that I run, or that I play in rather, one of our players, his character's motivation is to run away from his home because he killed somebody. We're level 9 adventurers now. We just spent the last two arcs doing heroic things and saving the world. Guess who
Somebody's gonna learn his name.
guess who already learned their name and sent envoys to go get him? Like literally, if he was playing his character consistently with his motivations, he should have been laying low as far away from there as he could,
Hmm.
not saving the world, right? Um, and one could argue that saving the world is maybe more important than that personal motivation, but you put the player in a situation where like maybe their character just doesn't feel that strongly about it, right? Maybe they don't know the full situation before they start to try and save anybody, right? They're not that
Hmm.
kind of selfless person. They're running away. They want to stay hidden.
Right.
So I think that when you're making a character's motivation at backstory at the outset of the game, you really got to think long and hard about what is my character's motivation? What do I want? What does my character want? And how am I going to go about doing that thing?
Where am I going? Where do I want to go?
Yeah, what do I want? What do I need? What do I need? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? You know, and that can change. Like I think the other thing too is don't get married to the backstory. It can actually change quite a bit, and sometimes if certain elements don't actually come into play during the story, you can outright change them entirely as long as you're talking to the DM about it. Um, like I think 2 days ago, I like finally specifically hammered out like Dremis's family, like my rogue, right? Like it's presumed that he had a family, right? I wish players would consider this more. I think that we all wish that were the case, but I think as a DM, it's kind of up to you to kind of shepherd that character creation in the first place. Um, because I'll tell you what, if they put the effort into the beginning to do this kind of work early on, it makes your life as a DM so much easier when it comes time to actually
Hmm.
try and incorporate those backstories into the story that's going on, because it just gives you more open threads to tap into for when you want to include that person's backstory and help provide them with specific motivation for what's going on.
Yep.
Um, Another example of like a changed backstory, right? Like the fighter in our party, his backstory was shit. I'm sorry, Nick. You might watch this, you might not. You know it. You wrote a shitty and inconsistent backstory with no that made no fucking sense. Like I'm sorry. So I retconned it in universe. He found out that his entire memory, all of his memories up until like 8 months ago, were a complete fabrication, and he doesn't know at what point they necessarily stopped being a fabrication, but
He just knows at which point,
it no
because
longer
that's when the
is.
campaign started.
It no longer is, right?
Exactly.
And you know what happened? His character acting, like his role playing, got so much more consistent. It's actually kind of startling. Like before that moment I wouldn't have bought into the idea that a good backstory makes a good role player. but I think it definitely helped.
We definitely saw huge improvement in his role play once he had a solid foundation for his character.
Yeah, because like tell you what, his previous motivation up until that point was run away from home because I murdered somebody. So, case in point, he's new. He writes a story, and again, like that I think is a difference between like character writing for a book or a short story versus character writing for a character's background for a role play game. Is that in the
Hmm.
story it is a done thing. The story is finished. You write the story, it goes from point A to point B. That's the end of the story. For D and
Hmm.
D, you're writing up until the beginning part. You haven't finished the middle and end yet. You don't know where your story is going to go, so you need to write it open ended so that way you can actually have that gameplay and enjoy that.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're going to be grasping for straws a lot of the time. So, have you had any similar situations where you had to like totally retcon someone's backstory mid session, mid campaign?
Um. Yeah. Yeah. One of in my current campaign.
Oh boy. Okay, lay it on
Um.
me.
So one of my players started the game as a dragon sorcerer.
Hmm.
Um. With a fighter multiclass. For those who don't know, Pathfinder doesn't have traditional multiclassing, so you don't take levels of a second class. You're just your one class all the way through, and then you can take feats that are multi-class feats instead of taking feats for your class. Um, so he's a sorcerer with a fighter multi-class, and at some point he goes, "Well, um, I don't want to be this fighter," and because we're new to the system, I gave everybody a little bit of leeway with their character creation and how much they could change about their character. And he says, "Well, I want to be a paladin as my multi-class now. I want to keep the sorcerer the same, but I want paladin as my multi-class." And I was like, "Well, now you have to have a religious background. Like, there's nothing in your story about religion at all, and now we just have to add a whole religion." And it wasn't too difficult in this case because this is a very religion heavy setting. Um,
Hmm.
but like at the same time, just adding a whole deity worship aspect to a backstory, just it was aggressive.
It's a lot, yeah. And like to be clear, like I would never recommend doing what I did to my fighter in this campaign. I would never recommend doing that to somebody who actually enjoys playing their character.
Yeah.
Not that he didn't enjoy it, but like that actually is like enjoys their background, really likes it, like uses it, such like that. But I think that he also understood by the time he was like level 11, which at this point we'd been playing for 2 years, that like his backstory I think was hampering his ability to kind of further engage in the story from where it is. And
Hmm.
power to him, man. He has troopered on and been an engaging player in that game the entire time. But
Yep.
his geez, guilty in your game nonetheless. For reference, this was a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, when you're new to the game, it's easy to write really unengaging backstories. That's I think a common mistake.
Geez,
Um,
look at all of the bad backstories I wrote for your campaigns.
yeah, look at this. Look at the ones that I wrote for mine, like for games that I played as a player, which I'll get into in a minute, I guess, to share. Um,
Oh, you know what? Actually,
mm,
King Flink has a story of one of my characters' backstories
that
that
had to
had to
get
be
retconned.
retconned. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Isaac Shadowfist, my favorite
your
character
great
that I've
Jedi.
ever played. Um, and we just retconned the whole thing that he was a clone and never actually the person that we said he was.
Yeah,
That was
and
great.
yeah, that works, right? Like you can do it sometimes, but I think that like in this case, I didn't tell Nick that I was going to do this ahead of time. I just started sowing some seeds early on. And one thing too is like I'm pretty flexible with a lot of this stuff. So sometimes I'll just put out questions and not necessarily have an answer planned until later when I actually do have to put a pin in it.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of open questions around his character, and so I finally one day just realized that there was a really neat way of tying it all together by just saying like, oh, the reason none of this stuff doesn't make sense on his character's backstory is because it wasn't supposed to. It's not real, and that's why he's magic now. Because since you guys weren't there, he was a level 6 fighter, and then he took his first level of sorcerer, or like a level 4 fighter or level 5 fighter, and then took his first level of sorcerer just randomly. He's like his character's like 20 something, and just randomly started manifesting magic the one day. As far as his character knows. So we worked out that the reason is because he actually is a very competent caster, but had his memories erased. And so this wild magic that his character is experiencing are elements of his character's history, kind of allowing itself to bleed through and manifest. So he has a esoteric understanding on how to cast magic, but it's not controlled because he lacks the understanding and discipline on where it came from.
He lacks the experience that he used to have.
Exactly. And so, should there ever come a point in time now where he gets that fixed, I'll allow him to probably restructure his character to be significantly more magic-y, or something along those lines, right?
Or
Um,
maybe he chooses never to have it fixed.
yeah, but I think that that at least gives him a really interesting character angle to look at, because now, like,
Hmm.
okay, do I want to? And these are questions that he started to ask in character, right? Like, who was I before my memories changed? If I get them back, would I be the same person? Was I even a
Hmm.
good person beforehand? And like, these are questions that really only the main like potential antagonist has an answer to, which obviously complicates things, um, as they were also responsible for this. But I think that giving that character that stuff to kind of riff on when they're having those interactions with people goes a really long way towards helping improve. I think not only his engagement with the story, but people's engagement with his character, because prior to that, he felt kind of one note. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So guys, invest in your backstories.
It was great, and you know it.
It was these. I did a party-wide retcon mid-campaign, and it resulted in 3 of the players actually playing some of the best characters they played for me, but 2 of them were already strong RPers. You know what? I think that that's fine too, right? I think that if you have people who are really good at role-playing, giving them a good backstory prompt is only going to make for better role-play.
Hmm.
But I think that where this sort of thing can come in is, if you're DMing for a new player, maybe write in some element that the character doesn't know about, so that way you can fill it in. Um, so, that's at least what I would do. Other things you can do, when it comes to like backstory generation, is maybe set out a few questions that you want everybody to answer about their backstory as a DM, and then use that as a prompt as well for helping kind of build stuff out. And then the one other trick that I did, that I always thought was really funny was, I had the weird situation where I had 2 players who independently decided they wanted to be amnesiacs during a Sagas
I
campaign.
remember this.
So this is the Sagas campaign I'm never going to get to run, but I had 2 players who independently decided they wanted to be amnesiacs. So I'm like, that's fine. You can be an amnesiac and not remember your history. I'm going to make up your history for everything before that you forgot, basically. So the stipulation is you can have no memory of your history, but at that point you're handing me the keys, and you can develop whatever history you want after you kind of came to, but everything before that I'm doing. And so I had planned an elaborate plot where like they were fated. They were 2 people who knew each other, were technically immortal, and were fated to re-meet each other each time, before killing each other. So I wasn't sure how I was going to execute that necessarily, but that was what I was going for. So like every once in a while, your players might just hand you gold and take advantage of it.
Uh, and one of those players had never played before. It was going to be great.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, don't be afraid to do crazy things like that too. Like again, I was gonna make this character functionally immortal, but his character didn't know that. And obviously, if he found it out, then that would probably change the way that he interacts. But you know, being immortal doesn't necessarily mean that your character can't be killed. um, if that makes sense.
It was it was eternal life, not true immortality.
Yeah. Um, so so you can definitely do things like that. Feel free to like homebrew things like that as well. Um, so that being said, I know we didn't really plan like a hard cutoff time for this for tonight, but we are getting close to 11:30 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was thinking of calling it probably about now, unless you want to add anything else to what we kind of talked about already.
Uh, no, I think we're good to end it here.
All right. So I guess we'll just do the standard, self shilling and plugging and stuff like that. So I guess first and foremost, everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining on our first pass at this sort of thing. I thought it was pretty successful, so I'm thinking that we may do this again next Thursday.
Sure.
So same time, 9 Eastern. I will get the video to this up to YouTube by the end of the weekend. I can say. Um, I still have some other stuff to do, but I should be able to get this to you guys, by Sunday, I would say. Um, if you want to follow us on social media, I'm at Vladdviever, which I guess I'll just put in chat um, on Twitter. So you can follow me there. Um, Marvin is at Tayugetsu, which you can also follow him there. Marvin, you also have a Twitch channel, which you recently made affiliate for. So
I do have a Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Tayogetsu, which I guess I'll put in chat. And links to all of my social media are in my About section on my
yeah,
channel.
and if you're watching this on YouTube, links to everything are going to be in the description as well, or at least as much of it as I can remember, based on this conversation. So look forward to that as well. If you're watching this on Twitch, of course, this is twitch.tv/Vladdviever. Um, I stream on Tuesdays and Sundays at around 9:30, usually Among Us or Pokemon Reborn, but it looks like we'll be doing some of this as well. Um, Marvin, I know you stream Among Us and Pokemon Showdown primarily.
Yep. I stream Tuesdays usually when Vlad is streaming Among Us. Sometimes Wednesdays, and then usually on Fridays. Um, Among Us is my main content, so if you ever want to check that out. Um, and then I'll play Pokemon Showdown in my off time, or if nobody's free for Among Us.
Yeah, solid option for sure. Um, so yeah, if you want to catch that, you can check out his replays on Twitch, of course, or just catch them live. You can catch my replays of Pokemon Reborn on the YouTube channel, and all of the replays of these videos. And yeah, if you have any suggestions, of course, please feel free to email us. I'm going to put an email in the description for the YouTube link, as well as a link to the Discord channel, which we'll be putting together. And next week, we'll pick somebody to guest in, and you can ask us anything roleplay related. Tabletop roleplay related, even if it's specific questions about how to handle things about in your game in particular. Um, please feel free. Actually, I guess I could go ahead and just. Do you want to put the link to the Discord in the chat now? I guess.
I don't think all of our privacy settings are set up yet, so we should probably hold off on that.
Okay. Well, tell you what then. I will get that into my About Us section of the Twitch channel when I get an opportunity to later this week, so that you can find it there. And again, I'll put it in the YouTube description as well once we get that sorted out.
Dope.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, everyone, for stopping by. I really appreciate the support. I'm sure you did too, Marvin.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Really appreciate it. And
Hope you enjoyed
our thing.
our yeah.
All right. Well, with that, have a great evening, and you know, catch you, as King Flink said, same bat time, same bat channel, next Thursday.